To watch these important lessons, subscribe to DP Education's YouTube channel right now. Click on the bell icon to stay updated on the latest lessons. Sri Lanka's largest free online school, DP Education.
So my dear children, in the earlier chapters, we discussed several things regarding to importance of biodiversity, threats to biodiversity, right? So here within this chapter, we'll be discussing about the certain types of features that can be observed in the ecosystems, right? Different kinds of features that can be observed in the ecosystems. So especially we are focusing about what are the kinds of things that we can observe within an ecosystem, and within these things, what are the certain types of relationships, important things, right? So those are the main things that we'll be discussing within this chapter, my dear children, right? So you are given with an assignment, right? First of all, before we are going to discuss about the lesson part, you are given with a small bit of an assignment. So within this assignment, what do you have to do? Select a plot of land in your school garden. Now draw separately the pictures of plants, animals and non-living components in that plot of land in 3 transparent sheets. So what you have to do, you have to select 3 transparent sheets, and within these transparent sheets, my dear children, you have to draw the 3 components that we can observe within that certain land. Those 3 components are, number 1, what is that? The plants, then animals, then non-living components. Okay, so you have to draw all of these things, right? Non-living components like soil, water. If there are water sources, then you have to draw water sources, then soil, then sunlight, then you have to draw rocks and so on. Non-living components. Then the living components like animals and plants. So you have to draw it using 3 different transparent sheets, my dear children. Then what do you have to do? Keep 3 transparent sheets overlapping. Now one on another you have to place it. Then you have to observe, right? So by observing this thing, you can get a certain idea about an ecosystem. Okay, you can get a certain idea about an ecosystem. Ecosystem is a place where we can observe different types of things, especially living things and non-living things, which are going to interact each other. Even we discussed about the ecosystems in the previous chapter, my dear children. So by doing this activity or by doing this assignment, my dear children, you could get an idea about that ecosystem is going to consist of all of these factors, living and non-living. Okay, and when these factors are going to interact each other, then we can find out then we can get the relationship between an ecosystem. Okay, all of these ecosystems in our planet Earth, they contain these relationships between living and non-living components, right? Then so this is a very simple assignment, my dear children. I hope that you would do this thing to get the idea about the ecosystems. Okay, right? Then the next one. So figure shows some pictures of similar assignment carried out around a pond. Now this is a pond. Okay, the similar assignment. So first, as you can see here, within the first diagram, the non-living components are there: water, soil, rocks and mountains, clouds, then the sun. Then in the next picture, you can observe the plants. So large trees are there, smaller trees are there, grass is there, then small flower plants are there, right? So the second one, plants. Then number 3, animals. Third figure, animals. So different animals are there in the third figure, my dear children. Hawk, then there is a cow, several hens, and rabbits, and a deer also, right? Then finally, you can observe the overlapped figure. So what you have to do, place one on top each other. Then you can observe this thing. So when you place this thing over here and this one over here, you can observe the entire figure like this, my dear children. So you will understand that the environment contains living organisms, animals and plants, and non-living components. So by doing this activity, my dear children, like I said in the earlier assignment, by doing this, we could get a clear idea that these environments, ecosystems, those ecosystems, each and every ecosystems in our planet Earth contains living components and as well as non-living things as well. Without non-living things, ecosystem would never create. Without the soil, sunlight, water, an ecosystem will never going to create, my dear children, right? We won't be able to observe ecosystems in Mars, the planet Mars. We won't be able to observe ecosystems. Why is that? Because there is no water, there is no habitable environment, there is no habitable gas like oxygen. So those non-living components are very important to have a certain environment, my dear children, or else an ecosystem. Not only the living things. Living things are going to survive because of those non-living components, favorable non-living components. Okay, right. So by doing this activity assignment, we can say that in each and every environment, in each and every ecosystem, there are living components, animals and plants, and as well as non-living components. Right then. So ecosystem. Once again, you are given with the topic ecosystem. All living organisms in a community and the physical environment interacting with them considered together as an ecosystem. So ecosystem means, my dear children, it's living organisms in a community and the physical environment interacting with each other, right? It is a certain condition, or it is a certain area which organisms and physical things interacts. Okay, so what are the examples for these things? What are the examples for these ecosystems? So when we are getting the introduction for the biodiversity, my dear children, first and foremost thing to do was, right, first and foremost thing that we did was, my dear children, get an identification or get an idea about the ecosystem. We discussed that thing under the ecosystem diversity. So there are plenty of ecosystems in our whole wide world, right? So we'll write down several examples. A beach, right? So a beach can be considered as an ecosystem. So I think you could remember that we assume that we went on a beach and we even wrote down the organisms that we could observe, right? We wrote them within that assignment or that activity. Okay, and also we wrote down several microorganisms that can be observed, and as well as plants. So beach can be considered as a ecosystem. Okay, it can be considered as an ecosystem. Then the next one, forest. A good ecosystem with rich biodiversity, my dear children. Large number of organisms, plants and animals both are living in a forest, and there are water sources, light sources like sunlight, and also soil, a good fertile soil. Then, my dear children, we can observe water sources like waterfalls, rivers and so on within a forest. So very well balanced, biodiversity rich environment. Then the next one, a beach, a forest, then an ocean, an aquatic environment, or else an aquatic ecosystem, my dear children, which consists of fish, coral, crabs, prawns, sea anemone, an aquatic weed, aquatic plants like hydrilla and microorganisms like algae and so on. An ecosystem, right? Mainly surviving on water, a non-living component. Next one. A town or else a village. Village. Town or else a village. Man-made ecosystems. Within towns and villages, we can observe roads. Then we can observe buses, machines, vehicles, some trees, organisms like cats, dogs, cows, hens. Okay. Then people, I mean like humans. Okay. Then birds like crows, magpies, parrots. So a village can be considered as an ecosystem. Okay. Not only that, my dear children, we can observe like ponds, rivers and so on. There are several things. So all of these things are included in a village or else a town. So these things can also be considered as what? An ecosystem, my dear children. Then the next one, right? Another example. So we wrote several terrestrial ones, no? So this is a terrestrial one. This is also a terrestrial one. We'll write another aquatic environment like a pond. So if you take a pond, even in your home garden also there can be a pond, right? So when you take the pond, my dear children, within a pond you can observe fish, different types of fish. Then you can observe water. You can observe different types of microorganisms, right? Different types of microorganisms like vulva, bacteria, right? Then different types of algae. So those things can also be observed. However, we won't be observe those things by our naked eye, but you know that those organisms are there. Okay. So not only those organisms, my dear children, we can also observe different kinds of fish, sometimes frogs, turtles and tortoise. Okay. So those organisms can also be observed. So there are macroorganisms and as well as microorganisms, and also pond is made up with water, non-living component. So all of these things interact in each other is considered as a ecosystem. Okay, place where all of these living and non-living components interact in each other can be considered as a ecosystem, right? So that is an ecosystem. So any kind of a place where the organisms are going to live on, right, can be considered as an ecosystem. Okay, right. Then features of an ecosystem. Interaction occur between living components as well as between non-living components. So here now we are mainly focusing about, we get a brief idea about what do you mean by the ecosystem. So in an ecosystem, now we are going to observe what are the special features. So the first and foremost main feature is we can observe different interactions between living components and as well as non-living components that are present in the ecosystem. So here it is given, interaction occur between living components as well as between non-living components. This is the first and foremost feature that we can observe within an ecosystem. Okay, so under that given the types of relationships. Number one given, living relationships. So what are the examples for living relationship? So like I said, when I was starting the lesson, my dear children, you know that when you take a certain plant, there are certain types of organisms who are living on that plant. Plant is a living organism, right? And there are different kinds of organisms like parrots, right? And other types of birds who are living on that particular plant. So living relationship. Those organisms like the parrots and other birds will not be able to survive if there are no any plants. I mean like if there are no any trees, then they don't have any habitats. Okay, so parrots and other birds, okay, parrots and other birds, they have the ability or they show an interaction between plants. Okay, so this particular interaction is classified as live-in interaction. Okay, live-in interaction. Right then, so here we can write example: birds living on trees. Okay, birds living on trees. Birds living on trees. Bird is a living organism. Then tree is also a living organism. So birds living on a tree can be considered as a living interaction. Then the next one, living non-living relationships. Living non-living relationships. So when you go further with the lesson, my dear children, we'll be discussing about these things in detail. So under that we'll be discussing about plenty of examples. Just for now I'm giving out a simple example with a simple bit of a brief. Okay, right. So the second one would be the second relationship, the living non-living relationships. Living non-living relationships. So living non-living relationship, what are the living and non-living relationships? One component should be living and the other one should be non-living. So the living component, sometimes these living components use these non-living components so that they can survive. For a simple example, now you breathe oxygen gas, right? You need oxygen gas to survival, right? For your survival, oxygen gas is very important. So oxygen gas is a component or else a type of a material. So it doesn't have a life. It's a non-living thing. But however, you guys are living. So my dear children, living non-living, as a living non-living relationship, we can write respiration carried out by, right? Respiration carried out by organisms. During respiration, oxygen gas is exchanged, right? Oxygen gas is obtained or received and carbon dioxide is released. Okay, oxygen and carbon dioxide received from the environment or from the ecosystem are non-living components. So these non-living components shows us direct relationship, or else these non-living components are being used by the living component, which is us, the people. Okay, so we can write the example. Respiration carried out by organisms. Right, respiration carried out by organisms absorb oxygen gas and release right, respiration carried out by organisms absorb oxygen gas and release carbon dioxide. Right, carbon dioxide. So respiration carried out by organisms absorb oxygen gas and release carbon dioxide. So oxygen gas and carbon dioxide are non-living components. These are non-living components. Organisms, any kind of an organism, living. So this is a good example for living and non-living relationships. Okay, then the final one, non-living relationship. So there are some non-living components which are interacting with another non-living component in an ecosystem. Okay, there are non-living components which are interacting with non-living components in an ecosystem. What is that? For example, soil erosion because of water, right? During the introduction part, we discussed about this thing. I have given you that example, right? Can you remember? So let's imagine that there is going to be a heavy rain. So in that case, sometimes landslides will occur. Landslide means heavy amount of soil erosion, right? So here the topmost layer is going to dissolve with water because of heavy rain. Okay, so here we can write the example: soil erosion because of water. Soil erosion because of water. So these are, my dear children, examples for interactions. So these interactions can be categorized into three main parts as living interactions or living relationships, then living non-living relationships, then non-living relationships. For a living relationship, we can say, or we can take an example like birds living on trees. Then for a living non-living relationship, we can take the example where the respiration carried out by organisms. In there, we absorb oxygen gas and release carbon dioxide gas. So in that case, my dear children, both the oxygen gas and carbon dioxide gases are non-living components, right? Organisms are living. So there is a relationship between living and non-living components. Then the third one, non-living component, you know that because of water, soil is going to erode. So that soil erosion carried out by water is a non-living component, relationship between non-living components. Soil is also non-living, water is also non-living. Okay, right. So these are the interactions that can be observed in an ecosystem. So in each and every ecosystem, we can observe these interactions, my dear children. So this is the first feature, right? Now let's head on to see the second feature. The energy flows through one-way stream. Energy flows through one-way stream. The solar energy which is used by green plants in photosynthesis is stored in the food produced during this process. Now, in each and every ecosystem within our planet Earth, my dear children, the main energy source is the sun. So even in our body also, we possess the energy of sun. How come? You know that photosynthesis is the main process which converts solar energy to chemical energy. Plants use solar energy to produce food. Okay, chlorophyll helps in that process. Chlorophyll is the one which helps to absorb solar energy. So this absorbed solar energy is getting converted into chemical energy during photosynthesis. So glucose is made by the use of carbon dioxide and water with the help of solar energy, which is the energy source. So solar energy pumped into oxygen and water so that it would convert into glucose. So within glucose, my dear children, solar energy is there. So that glucose is the one which we consume. You know that in order to be carnivorous organisms, there should be herbivorous organisms. Otherwise, you might think that now we are omnivorous organisms, no. So we won't be any trouble. We won't have any trouble. We can eat plant things. So plant-based materials, when we are eating plant-based materials, we receive energy from the sun, no problem. But how come you receive energy from, when you take an organism like a lion, right? It is not going to eat plant materials, no. Then how come it would receive energy? You might think like that. So I think in the previous grades, my dear children, like in the grade 6, we learned that those animals, like carnivorous animals, they depend indirectly on plants, because lion is going to feed on herbivorous animals. Herbivorous animals are depending on plants, right? So plants get nutrition from photosynthesis. So those nutritional parts are being eaten by herbivore, then herbivore being eaten by a lion. So ultimately, lion also has the same type of energy which is received from photosynthesis, the main energy source is, or the main energy type is solar energy. Okay, so photosynthesis is the main process that helps to convert that solar energy into chemical energy by the production of food. Okay, so that energy produced by the organisms, especially plants, is getting directed downwards through food chains. Now, what do you mean by a food chain, my dear children? I'll take this thing somewhat up. So, a plant is being eaten by a grasshopper, right? Then grasshopper is being eaten by a rat. Then rat is being eaten by, we'll take a cat. Okay. So energy produced by the plant through the photosynthesis flow towards the grasshopper when grasshopper is going to consume the plant. So that energy stored in grasshopper then once again transferred to the rat, right? Because of eating the grasshopper. Okay. Then rat, the energy contained within that rat is being transferred to the cat upon eating the rat. However, plant receive this energy mainly from where? Photo. So that's why the plants are also referred as producers. These things are called as consumers. Those are the ones who consume the energy that was synthesized by the plants, which are the producers. Okay. So sun provides solar energy to the plant. So plants carry out the process photosynthesis. Then upon the photosynthesis, food is getting produced, mainly the glucose. Then these food items consumed by first level of consumer. Then first level of consumer being eaten by a second level of consumer. Then by a tertiary consumer. This is how the energy is getting transferred from one particular link to another particular link in an ecosystem. So ultimately, all of us, right? For all of us, for all the organisms living in the ecosystem, energy is transferred like a stream, okay, as a one-way stream. This is as a one-way stream, okay, like this. That's it. So this is called as this kind of a thing is the one which is referred as a food chain, okay. It shows the transfer of energy, right, my dear children. Then the next one. So the solar energy which is used by the green plants in photosynthesis is stored in the food produced during this process. The energy flows from lower consumer levels to higher consumer levels through food chains or food webs. So like I said, my dear children, this particular thing is called as a food chain. So food chain shows the flow of energy starting from the producer to these consumers. So these are the ones who are considered as consumers. Within each and every level, there are certain number of consumers, right? So these consumers use the energy which is given out by the plant, which is the solar energy. So this is going to show the flow of energy from producer to consumers, right? So this is a special factor that can be observed within the ecosystem, my dear children. Then the third one given, the recycling of materials. Recycling of materials. Materials that the organisms receive from the environment continue to be back to the environment. The continuous exchange of materials between the organisms and the environment is an important feature of an ecosystem, right? Now, I think you all have heard about the water cycle. We receive water from the sky or from the atmosphere, mainly as rain, as a precipitation. So now we drink water, then finally we are going to excrete water as in the form of urine. So once again that water is getting collected to the soil. So that's when getting large amount of sunlight, water from the soil and water from the other sources is once again going to evaporate and travel upward. So like that way a cycle is going to create, my dear children. So here sometimes you know that there are water sources like rivers and other oceans and those kind of things, and in that case also water is going to travel up during the evaporation, and once again they will fall down and once again getting collected to those sources, and once again evaporated because of the sunlight, and this cycle is going to continue and continue. So within an ecosystem, my dear children, we can observe the recycling process of the materials, right? For a simple example, water. What will happen to water? Water will travel up and down and up and down and up and down because of what? Because of the recycling process, right? So this is a very important feature that we can observe within the ecosystems, my dear children. Components are getting recycled. Materials are getting recycled, right? Components or materials are getting recycled, right? So this is a main feature that we can observe within an ecosystem, my dear children. Right. Okay then we'll move on to see the next one. The fourth and the final feature, as an independent unit. Since there are constant interactions within the ecosystem, it has ensured the existence of biosphere. So it acts as an independent unit. It helps to create constant interactions between the ecosystem, right? So within the ecosystem, there are constant interactions. That means it is behaving as an independent unit. So it is very helpful for the survival of biosphere. So these are the key features that we can observe within the environment or within an ecosystem, my dear children, right? Okay then. Right, so now we are going to discuss, right, like I said, in detail we'll be discussing about the relationship. Now it's time to discuss about those relationships that we studied earlier in detail. Okay, so first of all we discussed about the living relationships. Now it's time to discuss about living relationships with several examples. So here you are given with a point. The interactions between the living organisms, right, are known as living relationships. So here interactions between living organisms are known as living relationships. These interactions are to meet the following needs, right? So there are living relationships. Living relationships are created mainly because of living organisms. Different living organisms interact in each other to create living relationships. What is the reason for creation of living relationships, my dear children? First and foremost thing, lion feeding on rabbits. So rabbit is a food for the lion. So living relationships mainly can be observed during the mode of nutrition, or simply we can say food, right? Food. So living interactions are meet. Living relationships can be observed to meet the following needs. What are the needs? First and foremost need is the food, need of food. Okay, so lion is an animal who is going to feed on flesh. So to get the flesh, to get the food that it need, it shows a relationship between different other kinds of animals. Then the next one, security. Security, like shelter, getting shelter. The earlier example which I have took, when I was writing down the living relationship, an example for the living relationship, can you remember? Parrots living on plant trees. So that thing, in that thing, my dear children, the plant is a living object. So that living object is providing shelter or security for the parrot. So it is a living relationship regarding the security of a one particular organism. Okay. Then the next one, third one and the final one, reproduction. Right, reproduction. So finding their mates, okay, finding their mates, suitable partners in order to reproduce. So in that case also, each and every organism shows some relationship between different organisms, right, but in the same species in here. Okay, so if you take up a certain individual, that individual, when it needs to reproduce, it is going to find out a certain mate, right? Okay, so these are the three main key relationship areas that we can identify under living relationships. Okay, so under the living relationships or interactions, these organisms need to meet following needs. What are the needs? Need for the food, need for the security, then finding out a certain mate for their reproduction. Okay, right then. So now let's head on to see what are the other contents. So now living relationships, the examples for the living relationships, my dear children. So earlier we discussed only one example. Now you are given with several. So animals consuming plants as food. So there are certain herbivore animals. You know that there are herbivore animals which is going to eat plant parts. Plant is a living thing. Then animal is also a living thing. Living relationship. So this is by doing this relationship or from this relationship, my dear children, the need of food of the consumer is getting fulfilled. Next one. Some predators consuming other animals, like in the earlier case which I took the example of lion eating a rabbit. So in that case, lion is the hunter, right? Lion is the hunter and rabbit is the prey and the predator. Okay, so in that case also, need for the food or nutrition is being satisfied. Next one, certain microorganisms depending on other living organisms. Now, when you take a certain kind of a disease condition, my dear children, let's take a skin disease. Skin disease means most of the times these skin diseases are created because of fungi or else bacteria or any other microorganisms. So in that case, what will happen? That particular skin disease, the tissues of the skin is being consumed by the bacteria or other type of microorganism for their survival, right? So here we can observe living relationships, right? Sometimes, my dear children, when you take a certain wound or else a cut, in that case, in those areas also, in that kind of an area also, several microorganisms are going to live on that particular place, right? So that's why actually the wound is not getting healed very well because of the action of microorganisms like bacteria and other types of microorganisms. Okay, so that is also a good example for a living relationship. Next one. Some animals use trees as their habitat. So I discussed this thing earlier, right? Some animals like parrots and other birds, they use trees as their habitats. So it is a living relationship. Next one. Animals hiding among plants for protection. So this is also a good example, right? Some animals like squirrels, they hide among plants for their protection, especially to protect from their predators. Now, have you seen a cat who is going to hunt for a squirrel. If the squirrel knows that the cat is going to hunt it, definitely that squirrel will run to a tree and hide. So the tree is providing a protection for the squirrel, okay, from the predator. So in here, my dear children, the security of the organism is protected by the plant. So here we can observe a relationship between living components. However, in order to give out a security, okay. Second one, some plants use animals to spread their species. Very good example, right? So, like I took that example previously about the rambutan plant. So, you know that the rambutan plant, it's going to produce large number of fruits. However, very large count of fruits will fall to the ground around the mother plant. So because of the competition, what will happen? Large number of plants will get died and only few will live. So to avoid that condition, my dear children, rambutan plant is fruit of the rambutan plant is edible. So animals like the bat and us, even humans and monkeys, they will eat this plant, I mean the plant fruit, the rambutan fruit, and the seed will be dropped down to a different place. So on that place, now the competition is somewhat reduced, because at the place where we are going to drop down the fruit or the seed, rambutan seed, right, there won't be any rambutan plant. There will not be any rambutan plant. So in that case, my dear children, the plant will grow for sure, right? Even a plant is there won't be any several other plants, right? Like millions of plants will not be there, like near a mother plant of a rambutan, okay? So therefore, that plant will definitely grow without any trouble. So that's the spread, right? That's what do you mean by the spreading, right? This is also called as what? This is also called as, my dear children, this is also called as the spreading, my dear children, okay, right? So for the spread of the plants, right, for the spread of their species, different kinds of plants use different kinds of fruits. Not only with the fruits, my dear children, there are another types of things as well. Like if you take love grass, okay, and nagadharana, those plants have special structures so that the seed is getting cling on animals, okay. So when the animal is going to clean the body, those clinged seeds will drop down, and on that particular place, what will happen? The plant will grow, okay. So these dispersal methods or spreading methods used by the plants are also shows living interactions. Plant is a living thing, animals are also living, that's why. Then the next one, some plants fulfill their nitrogenous requirements from insects, within brackets given insectivorous plants. So there are several plants that can capture several insects. So these insects are captured by the plant in order to satisfy their nitrogenous requirement. You know that to produce protein, nitrogen is a very important factor. Nitrogen is compulsory for the production of proteins. So plants, when they lack nitrogen, plants use, some plants, okay, not all, some plants use these insects in order to get their necessary protein amount, okay. Even they have traps, which have been placed within the plant to capture these insects, right, okay. So then finally given, producing new creatures through reproduction for the continuous existence of life. So we discussed this thing in the earlier case also, my dear children. one particular organism going for another mate in the same species to continue their species or to continue their generation, right? So for the reproduction also, one particular organism is not enough. The organism should have to find another different mate for it, right? When the suitable time period is going to come, one or particular individual is going to find out a certain mate and they would collectively reproduce new generation. So during reproduction also we can observe living relationship. So as you can see, several figures given for the living relationships, my dear children. The fish, like in here, they show these fishes can hide on these plant-like structures, sea anemone-like structures, right? So it is a living relationship. As you can see here within this figure, a tiger eating a deer. So living relationship. Here about the reproduction process, right? You can see that these organisms are finding out their mates, right? So these living relationships, my dear children, can be observed within an ecosystem as a main feature, right? Right then, so these are all about with the living relationships. Then now let's head on to see the next one, which is the living non-living relationships. The interactions between the living organisms and non-living components are known as living non-living relationships. So like we discussed in the earlier part, where we discussed about the living features and the living features, then we discussed about their living features, right? So and also we discussed their living relationships, my dear children. Now in this part we'll be discussing about, or mainly focusing about, the interactions that is going to occur between living components and non-living components. Okay, interactions that are going to occur between living components and the non-living components. Now in here, the organisms interact with their habitat to get non-living components such as water, air and light. So organisms interact with their habitat. That means the living place, right? So organisms are going to interact with the habitat or the living environment so that they could get the necessary factors, non-living factors like air, water and light. Okay, so examples given here, my dear children. The plants use solar energy for photosynthesis. Now solar energy, sunlight is a non-living component. So plants receive sunlight. Okay, plants receive sunlight in order to do photosynthesis. To do photosynthesis, plant receives sunlight. So sunlight is a non-living factor, plant is a living factor. Okay, so not only solar energy, but my dear children, absorb water from soil. Plants absorb water from soil for the same process, which is the photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is the main method of nutrition in plants. So to carry out their photosynthesis process, plants need carbon dioxide gas, water and sunlight. Okay, so the next one, plants and animals use atmospheric oxygen for respiration. So we discussed that thing also, right? We need oxygen gas for the respiration. That's how we burn the nutritions or the food within our body. So by the burning of food within our body, we produce energy that we need. Okay, so to burn something, oxygen is very important. So we have to receive oxygen from the external environment, which is an non-living component. Okay, so taking oxygen for our respiration can be considered as a living non-living relationship, my dear children, because we are living and the oxygen non-living. Next one, plants use atmospheric carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. So I explained this thing when I was discussing about the previous example. For the photosynthesis process, carbon dioxide is also an important factor. So my dear children, carbon dioxide is a non-living component, plant is a living component. So plants absorb carbon dioxide for the process of photosynthesis can be considered as a living non-living relationship. Then the next one given, the final one, plants release oxygen gas to the atmosphere as a result of photosynthesis. Now plants absorb carbon dioxide gas during the photosynthesis, a living-non-living relationship. And also, in opposite, we can say that the plants, upon absorbing carbon dioxide during the photosynthesis, they are also going to release oxygen gas, which is also an non-living component. So, release of oxygen gas after the process of photosynthesis can also be considered as a living-non-living relationship, my dear children, because oxygen is a non-living component and plant is a living. Okay, right. So, these are the examples where we can find the living, non-living relationships. Living, non-living relationships. Right then. So, you are given with a figure, my dear children. Within this figure, you can clearly observe the whole process of photosynthesis. Within a single diagram, you can observe this thing. So, here you can observe several relationships between living and non-living components. Right? Between living and non-living components, you can observe several relationships here. See, water getting absorbed by the roots of the plant. And my dear children, the sunlight which is coming from the above is getting absorbed by the chlorophyll which is present in the leaves, the light energy. And the carbon dioxide is getting absorbed into the plant leaf through the stomata, right? Through the stomatal pores, in the plant leaf, carbon dioxide is getting absorbed. From all of those factors, when necessary factors for the photosynthesis are met, food is getting produced within the plant leaf. And as a byproduct, my dear children, oxygen gas is getting expelled to the environment. So, absorption of water by the roots, absorption of carbon dioxide by the leaves, removal of oxygen to the atmosphere by leaves, absorption of sunlight or the light energy by leaves for the photosynthesis. All of these factors or all of these examples shows living, non-living relationship. Okay. These are interactions for living, non-living relationships. Then, the living creatures are also adjusted to match the specific environmental conditions of their habitats. This is known as adaptation. Example given, adaptations of plants to minimize transpiration in dry environment. The living creatures are also adjusted. So, my dear children, there are some certain things carried out by living organisms which are called as adaptations. Can you remember about the example which I have took about the polar bear? I told you that polar bear will not be able to survive near equator countries because it has a good thick fur and it has a heavy or else large amount of fat layer in its body. That means those factors or those things will reduce the loss of heat energy to the environment. Okay. Those factors helps to keep the heat energy preserved within the body of the organism. So, if that particular organism comes to here, then it will not be able to release the heat energy as this environment is somewhat hot, no? So, that particular organism will not be able to release heat energy to maintain the body temperature. So, definitely that particular organism will die, which is the polar bear. Okay. Same thing can be observed for the penguins as well. Okay, same thing can be observed for the penguins as well. So, these features came from their previous generations, from their previous ancestors who lived within the ice. So, to live on ice, they have developed certain special skills like having thick fur, having a thick fat layer. So, these features, right, development of these features to live on a certain environment is referred as adaptations. Adapting. This is referred as adapting. These features are referred as adaptations. Okay, so the living creatures are also adjusted to match the specific environmental conditions of their habitats. This is known as adaptation. So example given, adaptations of plants to minimize transpiration in dry environment. So not only that, my dear children, if you take a certain plant which grows in xeric environments, okay, xerophatic plants. So xerophatic plants have the ability to minimize the transpiration. Transpiration is the process of removing water vapor from stomatal pores of the plant leaves. So higher the number of plant leaves, higher the transpiration. Now in these areas, my dear children, these areas are located in wet zone. Okay, Colombo is an area which is located in wet zone. So we receive plenty of rain throughout the year. So when you take areas like Hambantota, then Puttalam, Jaffna, those areas do not receive rain like us in Colombo district. So in that case, my dear children, the plants that are growing in those areas should have to minimize the transpiration. Otherwise, the plant will die without water. So in order to minimize the transpiration, they will have different adaptations, like having thin leaves. Some leaves are very thick so that they can store water, and some might have like less number of leaves, and in some plants leaves are reduced to spines. For leaves they have spines, and like that way there are different adaptations. We even discussed these things in our previous grade, like in grade 8, right? Okay, so these things followed out by organisms in order to match their living environment are referred as adaptations. Okay, so not only animals but plants also show adaptations. Right, then my dear children, the final one, non-living relationship. The final type of relationship that we can observe within the ecosystems. Non-living relationships. So here it is given, the interactions between non-living components are known as non-living relationships. So here both the components or both the things are non-living. That's why it is referred as non-living relationships. Examples given: soil erosion by water. So water is a non-living component, my dear children, and also soil is also non-living, right? And also soil non-living. So here you can see within the figure also a pond, right? A pond subjected to water. Here it shows an environment which is subjected to soil erosion. So water is the main reason in here within this figure for the soil erosion process. Okay. Then soil erosion by water is a good example for non-living relationship. Then rock withering due to water and solar heat. Rock withering, right? So I think you could remember in grade 7 we discussed about the rock cycle. Under the rock withering we discussed about rock withering methods. So over there we discussed that because of water, sunlight, acid rains and other factors like wind, what will happen? The rocks are going to wither down. Okay, so because of withering of rocks, right, the soil is getting created. Can you remember? So that process of the withering of rocks can be considered as a non-living relationship, because my dear children, wind, water, sunlight, all of these factors are non-living factors. Rock is also non-living. So rock withering and rock cycle, and also in here the soil erosion, these things are considered as non-living relationships. Non-living relationships. Right then, so these are the examples for non-living relationship. The specialty here is that non-living components are the ones which are getting interacted each other. Right then. So you are given with an activity here. Right? Name the plants, animals and non-living components that can be seen in the given plot of land. So there is a plot of land over here. So you have to name plants, animals and non-living components that can be seen. Okay. Write sentences about the interactions that exist between the living organisms and non-living living organisms and non-living and non-living materials. Right. So what you have to do, first of all, you have to write down the types of plants and animals that can be observed within this figure. Okay, plants and animals that can be observed within this figure. So I will write 3 plants, 3 animals and, my dear children, 3 non-living materials. Okay, then I will write down another 3 interactions, okay, as sentences. This is only as a support for you guys, okay? So you have to follow this thing at your home. You have to do this thing at your home, my dear children. It's important to identify these things and about the relationships, okay? Right, so I'll write down 3 then. Take the slide somewhat up. Let's take a table. Plants, animals, right? Then the non-living components. Right, so plants, animals, right? Plants, animals, then what is the other one, my dear children? Non-living things, right? So living organisms and non-living and non-living materials. So here we'll mention as non-living components. Non-living things. Okay, so plants, animals, non-living things. So we'll write down the 3. Okay, I'll write down 3, so you have to complete the others. Right, so let's see what are things that we can observe. Let's take animals first. So here you can observe a goat, then there are bees, right, and there is a fish. So goat, bees, fish, and over there I can see even cattle, and there is a bird also, right? So animals, I'll write 3 animals then. So there are even more, but I'll write 3: goat, fish and bees. Let's write goat, fish, bees. Then types of plants. Over there I can see paddy fields, so paddy plant. Then in here I can observe grass. So this is like a mango plant, right? So mango plant, we'll mention as a mango plant. It's like some kind of a plant, fruity plant. So I'll mention as mango plant. Okay, Right, so we'll write down mango tree. Then grass. Then paddy. Right, mango, grass and paddy plant. Then non-living components, my dear children. Non-living components are quite easy. We can observe over here water, right? You can observe, clearly observe water. Then this is like in the daytime, no? So we can observe light. And even we can observe the land, which is the soil. Even we can observe the clouds over there, right? So there is no sun, however we can observe the light energy. So I'll write as light, water and land. Within brackets I'll include as soil. Right, now it's time to write down some interactions then. We'll write down some interactions then. What are the interactions? So as you can see here, right? As you can see here, right? We have to write sentences about the interactions that exist between living organisms, living, non-living and non-living materials. Okay. So first of all, I'll write down living interaction. Living interaction. So here, goats eating grass. Grass living, goats living. So living relationship. Write down. Number 1. Right, goats eating grass, right? It is a living relationship. Then number 2, then we have to write down living non-living relationship. I'll write one each, one from living, one from living non-living and non-living. Okay, so here you can observe a fish living in water, right? Fish living in water, living, non-living relationship, water non-living, fish living. So I'll take the slide up. You can write the answer. Fish living in water. Fish. Right, fish living in water. Living, non-living. Right, living, then living, non-living one, fish living in water, living, non-living example or interaction. Then the third one, final one, right, final one. So non-living relationship, we have to write down a non-living relationship. So here you can observe rock. There is a rock, okay, and this is water. So rock, you know that rocks are getting withered, right? Rocks are getting withered down because of the water, right? So this is a non-living interaction. Then soil erosion, definitely there is going to be soil erosion within the within these streams or within these regions, because of what? Because of the stream which is flowing downwards. Okay, so soil erosion by water, we can take that thing without any trouble for the non-living interaction. So we'll write it down. Number 3. Right? Non-living, soil erosion by water. Non-living feature, my dear children, or else non-living interaction. So I have written down 3, my dear children, by using the picture over there. I have written down 3 of interactions with 3 plants, animals and non-living things. So this is only as a support. What you have to do at your home, look at the figure thoroughly, go through it, then identify the components separately, then try to write down even more interactions and even more animals, plants and non-living things from the figure. Then identify and write down the interactions. Okay, so I hope that you will follow up this activity at your home and you will do it. Right then. So this is the activity then. Okay, this is the activity. So with that activity, my dear children, I'm going to wind up third chapter related to the lesson. So over with this lesson, with this chapter, my dear children, over here we discussed about important factors in ecosystem. Then, my dear children, we discussed about different kinds of relationships that can be observed within an ecosystem. So those are the things mainly we focused within this lesson part or within this chapter. In the next chapter, my dear children, we'll be mainly discussing about features of ecosystems and their importance. Okay, so I hope to meet you with our next chapter to discuss those things.
To watch these important lessons, subscribe to DP Education's YouTube channel right now. Click on the bell icon to stay updated on the latest lessons. Sri Lanka's largest free online school, DP Education.